They laughed at my coat, an old navy wool one with frayed sleeves and a missing button. They laughed because they thought it told them everything they needed to know about me. Poor, invisible, irrelevant. But what they didn't know was that the woman inside that coat once built an empire from nothing. And that night, as I stood beneath that glittering chandelier, their laughter didn't break me. It reminded me who I really was. That was the moment I knew I had to take back control of what I'd lost: respect. My name is Lucille Grant, and if you've ever been underestimated because of how you look, then you'll understand my story. Before I begin, tell me, where are you watching from? I always love knowing where my stories reach, because pain and pride sound the same in every corner of the world. Now let me take you back, before the humiliation, before the limousine, before the title Madam President meant anything to the people who mocked me. I grew up in a little town in South Carolina, in a 2-bedroom house my father built with his own hands. My mother sold pies at the church bazaar, and my father fixed cars from our dirt driveway. We didn't have much, but I learned early that dignity doesn't come from money. It comes from work done honestly and a name kept clean. When I was 17, I left home with one suitcase, $53, and a notebook full of dreams. I worked as a cleaner in a hotel by day and took business classes at night. The smell of polish and bleach became part of me. Every surface I scrubbed, I whispered to myself, one day, I'll own a place like this. Years later, after my husband Charles passed away, I poured every ounce of grief into work. I started a property management company from my kitchen table. No fancy investors, no shortcuts, just a phone, determination, and the memory of every door that had ever been shut in my face. The business grew slowly. I hired other women like me, widows, single mothers, women people ignored. We became a small family, and before long, that kitchen table dream turned into Grant Enterprises, one of the state's most respected real estate firms. But while I built the company, I tried to build something even more precious. My son, Michael. He was my pride, my reason to keep breathing when nights felt endless. I wanted him to have what I never did: ease, comfort, belonging. Maybe in giving him everything, I taught him to forget where we came from. When I finally retired, I thought peace would follow. I bought a modest little house on the outskirts of town, roses in the garden, a swing on the porch, silence inside. But silence is a lonely sound when you've spent your life building noise. Then Michael met Vanessa. She was beautiful, the kind of woman who looked expensive just by standing still. Her family was old money Charleston, the sort that dined with politicians and wore pearls to breakfast. When he brought her home for Sunday dinner, I could see it in her eyes. That quiet calculation, the kind that measures a person by what they wear, not who they are. She smiled politely, but her gaze lingered on my hands, still rough from years of labor, and on the simple furniture I'd chosen for comfort, not display. I told myself I was imagining it, but deep down, I knew. That night, as I washed the dishes alone, I caught my reflection in the kitchen window. The same woman I'd been for decades, strong, steady, and perhaps a little too humble. I didn't know then that humility would soon be mistaken for weakness, and that misunderstanding would tear my heart wide open before it set me free. The first time Vanessa truly revealed who she was, it wasn't through her words. It was through her silence. Silence that dripped with judgment. Silence that made me feel like the wallpaper in my own home. It was a warm Saturday afternoon, the kind where the sunlight turns golden and every sound feels softer. Michael had called earlier in the week and said cheerfully, "Mom, Vanessa wants to visit. She's been dying to see the house I grew up in." I smiled at the thought. Maybe this was my chance to get to know her better, to show her that warmth can live even in a modest home. I spent the morning baking her favorite, or at least what I'd been told was her favorite, a lemon chiffon pie. The good plates came out of the cabinet, the ones with the tiny cracks along the edges that held more stories than most people's lives. When they arrived, Vanessa stepped inside first. Her heels clicked on the hardwood, echoing louder than her greeting. "Wow," she said slowly, eyes scanning the living room like a critic appraising a painting. "This place is quaint." Quaint. The word felt like a pin through my chest. Michael followed behind her, grinning in that boyish way that always softened me. "She's been excited to meet you again, Mom," he said, setting a small bouquet of lilies on the table. Vanessa's smile didn't reach her eyes. "We brought flowers," she added. "They'll brighten up the space." I thanked her, even though I didn't need brightening. Not from her. The sun coming through my window had always been enough. As the afternoon went on, I tried my best. We sat for tea and I told stories about how Michael once sold lemonade to passing cars, or how Charles had built the swing on the porch with his own hands. Vanessa nodded politely, her eyes flicking toward her phone every few minutes. At one point, she whispered something to Michael. He chuckled, but it was nervous, almost apologetic. I pretended not to notice. Then, when she thought I'd stepped into the kitchen, I heard it. Her voice. Smooth, amused, careless. "Your mother's house smells like old books and dust. It's so tiny, Michael. I can't believe you grew up here." My hands froze around the teapot. "Vanessa," he whispered back, "don't say that. She can hear you." "Well, maybe she should," she said. "It's like stepping into another century." I stayed in that kitchen longer than necessary, staring at the pie on the counter. The smell of lemons and sugar filled the room, but it suddenly felt too sweet, too heavy. When I returned, they both straightened up like children caught misbehaving. "Everything all right?" I asked gently. "Of course," Vanessa smiled, voice coated in honey. "We were just talking about how cozy everything is." Cozy. Another pin. I sat with them a while longer, but her laughter, high and practiced, never reached the heart of the conversation. It was the kind of laughter that says, "I'm here, but I'm above this." When they left that evening, I stood by the door as their car pulled away. I noticed her glance back at my home, not with warmth, but with relief, as if she'd escaped something uncomfortable. I sat alone at my kitchen table, the lilies wilting slightly under the lamp. I thought of Charles and the life we'd built. Every corner of this house held memories, love, sacrifice, beginnings. But now, someone had walked through it and made it feel small. Michael called later that night. "Mom, Vanessa didn't mean anything by it," he said softly. "She's just not used to simplicity." Simplicity. Another word that people like her used when they meant less. I told him not to worry, that I understood. But when I hung up the phone, I looked around the room and whispered, "Maybe she doesn't understand. But one day, she will." I didn't know it then, but that quiet moment, me, the house, and the fading flowers, was the start of something much bigger, because respect can be buried under silence, but it never dies there. It waits, and I was about to learn that waiting can be its own kind of power. The night of my son's engagement party began like a dream and ended like a lesson I'd never forget. Michael had called me 2 weeks before, his voice bubbling with excitement. "Mom," he said, "Vanessa's parents are throwing an engagement dinner at the Grand Royale downtown. It's going to be amazing. I can't wait for everyone to meet you properly." Properly. That word made me smile and ache. I'd already met them once, but maybe this time he wanted to show that I belonged. So I took extra care that evening. I wore my old navy wool coat, the one Charles had given me on our 10th anniversary. It wasn't new, but it was mine. It carried the scent of years, the warmth of hands that built a life beside me. I brushed my hair back into a neat bun and pinned my late husband's gold brooch at the collar. When I arrived at the Grand Royale, the marble floors gleamed under crystal chandeliers. Waiters in crisp uniforms floated between tables, carrying champagne flutes. The contra air smelled of roses and money. I spotted Michael near the stage, dressed sharp in a tailored navy suit. His face lit up when he saw me, for a moment. Then it dimmed, almost imperceptibly, as his eyes drifted to my coat. "Mom," he said, hugging me quickly, "you look nice." He hesitated on that last word like it had to be chosen carefully. Before I could reply, Vanessa appeared, flawless as always. Her white satin dress shimmered under the lights, her pearls perfect, her lipstick immaculate. "Oh!" she exclaimed with practiced surprise. "You made it!" She leaned in to kiss my cheek, her perfume sharp and overwhelming. "You didn't have to dress up, Mrs. Grant. It's just family." Just family. I nodded. I wouldn't miss it. As the evening went on, laughter filled the room, but it wasn't the kind that welcomes you in. It was the kind that circles around you, keeping you on the outside. Vanessa's parents were seated at the front table. Her father, tall and silver-haired, raised his glass for a toast. "To our daughter," he said, "and to Michael, who's soon to be part of the family." There were smiles and clinking glasses, until Vanessa's mother leaned closer to another guest and whispered, not softly enough, "That woman? Is she staff?" The guest chuckled. No, that's his mother, I think." Vanessa laughed lightly, then looked my way. "Oh, don't be silly," she said, her voice just loud enough to carry. "She's not family. She's the cleaning lady." The laughter that followed was quiet at first, a ripple, but it grew. I felt it move through the tables like a cold wind brushing across my shoulders. I didn't move. I didn't cry. I simply stood there, still as a tree weathering a storm. Michael's face went pale. He opened his mouth to speak, then closed it again. And in that silence, his silence, my heart cracked in a way I can't quite describe. Vanessa smiled sweetly. "Oh, I was just joking," she said, her tone sugar-coated, but her eyes held no apology. I placed my napkin on the table and rose to my feet. "Thank you for the invitation," I said quietly. "It's been a lovely evening." I walked toward the exit, each step steady, each breath measured. The hostess tried to stop me. "Ma'am, can I call you a cab?" I smiled. "No need, my ride's waiting." Outside, the night air was cool and clean. The sound of laughter from inside faded behind me as a sleek black limousine pulled up to the curb. The driver stepped out quickly, opening the door. "Good evening, Madam President," he said, bowing slightly. "The board is waiting for you." I nodded and slipped inside, the warmth of the leather seats wrapping around me like armor. As the city lights blurred past, I looked down at my coat, the same coat that had drawn their laughter, and smiled faintly. "Let them laugh," I whispered. "They just mistook grace for poverty." That was the moment I decided the world needed reminding, that you can't measure a woman's worth by what she wears, not when her silence holds more power than their laughter ever will. The morning after that humiliating night, I sat by the window with a cup of tea that had long gone cold. The world outside was soft and gold, but inside me something had shifted, something quiet, sharp, and permanent. They thought they knew who I was because of a coat. They thought my silence meant shame, but silence, I've learned, can be the loudest language of all. When I'd stepped away from Grant Enterprises 2 years earlier, I told everyone I was retiring. That wasn't entirely true. I had stepped back, yes, but only from the spotlight, not from the throne. I still owned 60% of the company, still approved every major project, and still sat as president emeritus of the board. People assumed age had slowed me down. It hadn't. It had only taught me to move differently, quietly, deliberately, and with purpose. That Monday morning, my assistant Tanya arrived right on time. She was in her 40s, sharp-eyed and loyal. One of the women I'd hired decades ago when no one else would take a chance on her. She carried a folder full of updates and news clippings. "Ma'am," she said, placing the folder in front of me, I heard what happened last night, I raised an eyebrow. Word travels fast. Tanya's expression hardened. They disrespected you in public, the same people who begged for your investments last year. I smiled faintly. That's the thing about masks, Tanya. They eventually slip. She hesitated, then asked, "What are you going to do?" I looked out the window at the rose bushes Charles and I had planted years ago. Nothing. For now. Let them believe I'm just the cleaning lady. Tanya grinned. You've got that look in your eyes again. The one you get before something big. Over the next few weeks, I threw myself into work. Meetings, expansion plans, charity projects. Most of my team didn't even know about the insult. I'd told no one else. I wanted my revenge, if you could call it that, to arrive not as an explosion, but as revelation. That's how you teach arrogance a lesson. Not by shouting, but by letting truth walk in, quietly, and take a seat. Meanwhile, rumors about me began to swirl among Michael's circle. Vanessa had been busy talking. At brunches and charity luncheons, she'd giggle to her friends and say things like, Michael's mother used to be successful, back in the dinosaur days. Or, it's sad, really. She clings to that old company as if it still matters. One of my colleagues overheard and told Tanya, who told me. I simply nodded. Let her talk, I said. Every lie she tells just sets the stage for a louder truth. A week later, I got an invitation, gold-edged, embossed, elegant. Vanessa had sent it herself. Grant Family Charity Gala, honoring future philanthropists. My name wasn't mentioned anywhere on the card. Neither was my company's. I laughed when I saw it. So that's how she wants to play this. Instead of responding, I made a quiet phone call to the event organizers I'd sponsored for over a decade. By the end of the day, they'd confirmed that my company was, in fact, the primary sponsor of the event. Vanessa just didn't know it. That night, I sat on the porch with a glass of sweet tea, the crickets humming in the dark. I thought about the years I'd spent raising Michael, the lessons I tried to teach him about humility and heart. I'd failed somewhere, I knew that, but perhaps this was the moment to make him see, not through scolding, through truth revealed in its own light. I whispered into the night, "You can't buy class, Vanessa, but I can afford to show you what it looks like." And so I planned. I wasn't going to seek revenge. I was going to teach remembrance, to remind my son who his mother really was, and to remind Vanessa that every empire she envies was once built by hands that cleaned floors. The woman they called the cleaning lady was about to host the gala they were bragging about, and this time, no one would laugh. The night of the charity gala arrived like a quiet storm. I didn't plan to expose anyone, not exactly. I simply intended to remind the world that silence isn't weakness and that humility doesn't mean invisibility. The Grand Royale ballroom shimmered again, the same place where laughter had burned me weeks earlier. This time, the banners above the stage read, "An Evening of Hope, sponsored by Grant Enterprises." I watched from the wings as guests poured in, all in glittering gowns and sharp tuxedos. Photographers clicked, and the orchestra filled the air with soft strings. Tanya stood beside me, eyes gleaming. "They still don't know?" she whispered. "Not yet," I said, adjusting the same navy coat they'd once mocked. "Let's keep it that way." Vanessa and her parents entered grandly, their laughter carrying like bells. Michael followed, looking proud but distracted. They greeted the organizers, posed for photos, and accepted compliments on their generosity, blissfully unaware that every flower, every chandelier, every glimmering detail in that hall had been paid for by me. When they spotted me near the entrance, Vanessa blinked. "Mrs. Grant?" she said, voice coated in disbelief. "I didn't realize you were invited." I smiled calmly. "It's a public event. Anyone supporting the cause is welcome." Her lips curled into a faint smirk. "Well, I'm glad you could join us. You might even meet some of the donors tonight." "Oh," I said lightly. "I plan to." As dinner began, the host took the stage, a tall, warm man I'd worked with for over a decade. He tapped the microphone, and the room hushed. "Tonight," he began, "we gather to honor compassion and perseverance, the values behind this event, generously funded by one woman who's shown both for decades." Vanessa leaned toward Michael, whispering something I couldn't hear. Her expression was smug. Then the host continued, "Please welcome our longtime sponsor and this year's honoree, Madam Lucille Grant, President of Grant Enterprises." The applause started slow, uncertain, then built like a wave. Cameras flashed, heads turned. Vanessa froze mid-sip, her wine glass trembling. Michael's fork clattered to the table. I rose calm and steady and walked toward the stage. Every step echoed. My coat, the one that had been called shabby, servant-like, caught the light in soft navy waves. The host hugged me warmly. "We're honored to have you back in person, ma'am." I turned to the crowd. For a moment, silence. Then the realization began to spread. Whispers rippling like fire through dry grass. "That's his mother? She's the Lucille Grant? She's the owner?" I stepped up to the microphone. My voice, though soft, carried clear. "Thank you for this honor," I began. "When I started my company, I cleaned offices by day and signed contracts by night. I've learned that life has a funny way of testing what we claim to believe, especially when it comes to respect." I paused, eyes sweeping the room. It's easy to be kind to someone who looks like they belong. It takes character to be kind when you think they don't. Vanessa's face was pale. Her smile was gone. Her parents stared, stiff and speechless. I've been mistaken for many things in my life. A secretary, a cleaner, a nobody. And I never corrected them, because power doesn't need an introduction. There was a stillness in the air, the kind that precedes thunder. Then came applause. Real applause, not polite, genuine. When I stepped off stage, Vanessa tried to catch my eye. I met her gaze just long enough to let her see that I saw everything. Michael approached slowly, his eyes wide with shame and pride mixed together. "Mom, why didn't you tell me?" I smiled faintly. "Because you stopped asking who I was." He looked down. "I'm so sorry." "Don't be," I said softly. "Just learn." Later that night, as guests surrounded me with congratulations, Vanessa stood off to the side, alone, her pearls glinting under the chandeliers. For the first time, she looked small, and for the first time, I didn't feel invisible. That was the turning point. Not because I'd humiliated them, but because I'd reminded myself of something I'd forgotten. You don't have to shout to be heard. You just have to stand tall in the silence. The night after the gala, my phone buzzed nonstop. Messages from board members, journalists, old friends, all congratulating me. But the one message I waited for never came. Michael didn't call. He finally showed up the next afternoon. I was in the garden trimming my rose bushes when I heard his car pull up. For a moment, I almost didn't turn around. I wanted to let him walk the same path Vanessa once had. Past the porch swing, the chipped fence, the reminders of where we started. "Mom," he said quietly. I turned. His eyes were red-rimmed, his tie loosened, his pride deflated. I don't even know what to say. I laid the pruning shears down and wiped my hands. "Try the truth." He hesitated. "Vanessa, she told me you embarrassed her on purpose." I almost laughed. Embarrassed her? I sponsored a charity event. If truth humiliates her, then maybe she's been living too comfortably in lies. He looked down at the dirt under his shoes. "You should have told me who you really are." I tilted my head. "Who I really am?" I asked softly. "Michael, I'm the same woman who packed your lunches, stayed up through your fevers, and took a second job to pay for your college. I never changed. You just stopped seeing me." His voice cracked. "I was ashamed, Mom. Not of you, of how people looked at you that night. Vanessa said appearances mattered in her world, and I wanted to fit in. I didn't realize what I was losing trying to please her. The words hung heavy between us. Vanessa arrived later that evening. Her heels clicked across the porch like they did the first time she visited, but the confidence in her walk was gone. She clutched her purse like a shield. "Mrs. Grant," she began, "I came to apologize." I looked at her, really looked. The flawless makeup, the tremor in her hands, the practiced smile that no longer worked. "Are you apologizing?" I asked. "Because you're sorry or because you were caught?" Her lips parted, then pressed together. "Both," she admitted after a pause. "I was wrong. I misjudged you." I nodded. "You didn't just misjudge me. You misjudged every woman who doesn't wear her worth on her sleeve." She swallowed. I don't expect forgiveness." "Good," I said gently, "because forgiveness is something you earn through change, not convenience." Michael stepped onto the porch beside her. "Mom, Vanessa's moving back in with her parents for now. We both need time." Vanessa looked down. "I wish you nothing but peace," she whispered before walking back toward her car. The moment she drove off, the silence settled between us like dust after a storm. A few weeks later, news spread that the engagement had quietly ended. Michael returned to his work, but this time something in him had softened. He began stopping by my office at the company more often, asking questions, listening. He'd finally seen what respect built. And what? Arrogance destroyed. One afternoon, as we reviewed some files, he said, "Mom, you've been leading with grace all your life. I just didn't recognize it." I smiled faintly. "That's the trouble with grace, son. It rarely announces itself." When Vanessa's name came up again, a rumor, a headline, some new socialite drama, I didn't flinch. I'd already let it go. My revenge hadn't been her humiliation. It was my peace. I'd shown her, and my son, that dignity doesn't need defense. It just needs to stand still long enough for truth to arrive. As I sat on my porch that evening, the sunset painting the sky in orange and gold, I whispered to myself, sometimes silence teaches louder than anger ever could. And for the first time in a long time, I felt the quiet wasn't empty. It was victory. The months that followed felt different, not softer, but steadier. The kind of peace that doesn't come from pretending things never happened, but from knowing you've survived them and chosen to stay kind anyway. Michael began stopping by every Sunday, not out of obligation, out of genuine care. He'd sit on the porch swing with me, the same one his father built decades ago, and we'd watch the sun dip behind the trees. Sometimes we'd talk about work, sometimes about nothing at all. He started asking about my early years at the company, about the deals I closed when no one believed in me. "You did all that without investors?" he asked one day, wide-eyed. I smiled. "Just grit, prayer, and a whole lot of unpaid sleep." He chuckled softly. "You make it sound easy." "Oh no," I said, shaking my head. "It was brutal. But so is life for anyone who refuses to stay small." That line made him go quiet. I saw it in his face, the realization that for years he'd mistaken quiet for weakness. A few weeks later, he brought me a gift, a simple, elegant box wrapped in navy ribbon. Inside was a brand new wool coat, dark blue, tailored, strong. "I know it'll never replace the old one," he said, "but I wanted you to have something that reminds you of what that coat stood for, not what they thought it meant." My throat tightened. "Michael." He looked down, his voice trembling. "I can't erase what happened, but I can make sure I never let anyone treat you like that again." I touched his cheek and smiled. "Son, you don't need to protect me. Just remember me. That's all I ever wanted." As winter gave way to spring, I found myself returning to the office more often, not to lead, but to guide. I mentored young women who reminded me of myself years ago, weary, hopeful, underestimated. Every time one of them said, "I don't think I'm strong enough," I'd smile and tell them, "Strength isn't about shouting. It's about showing up when they least expect you to." One afternoon, as I watched those women file into a meeting, confident and ready, I realized something beautiful. All those years of silence, of swallowing pride, of standing still while others laughed. They hadn't diminished me. They'd seasoned me. Vanessa never reached out again, and honestly, I didn't need her to. Not every story ends with reconciliation. Some just end with clarity, and that's enough. I heard later that she'd moved to New York, working for a design firm her father bought her. I wished her well, quietly. Life has its own way of teaching the lessons we refuse to hear. As for me, I kept moving. Slower now, but with more intention. The garden bloomed again, the roses fuller than ever. And one evening, as the sun set and the light turned that soft golden hue, I thought back to that night. The laughter, the humiliation, the limousine, the boardroom waiting for me. What a full circle that was. I leaned back on the porch swing and whispered, "Respect isn't demanded. It's demonstrated, again and again, until the world remembers who you are." So if you're watching this and someone's ever laughed at your pain, your clothes, your story, remember this: their laughter says more about them than it ever will about you. You don't need to fight for validation. You just need to keep walking in your truth until it becomes impossible to ignore. And when that day comes, when the ones who doubted you finally see who you are, don't gloat, just smile, because dignity has already done the work for you. Thank you for listening to my story. Now tell me, where are you watching from tonight? Because somewhere out there, another woman is being underestimated, and I hope my story reaches her before she forgets what she's worth.